Thank you so much for tuning into another monologue by We Can Fight Like Cats If We Have to. I am Saly Davis, one of the co-hosts on the show. And so I wanted to do a little monologue on what I observed in the Convoy 2022. So I spent, I want to say, a good 24 hours between the span of 2 days, keeping an eye on what's going on in the events, both on social media, but also through live feeds from general participants of the protest. And so I really went in. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion on the foundation of what this was. I went in with my own pre-existing opinions, whether I like it or not. That's what human nature is. And we all go in and try to keep as open of a mind as we can when we try to look at the events as kind of an investigative journalist to see what is going on. In order for me to understand what this protest was about, I had to understand what was happening within our country, but also I had to really look into who the people were involved in this protest, but more importantly, that were organizing this protest. So my biggest concern with this protest was the organizers. So you have Tamara Leach and you have Pat King. Pat King, if I am not mistaken, was a formal leader of formal member of the Maverick Party. Tamara Leach is a secretary with the Mavericks Party. And they were essentially the two that started this movement. Now, in my research, I found an interview on an evangelical website for some sort of an evangelical show in the States that was interviewing Pat King, and I can put that description in the link below, in the description below. I can put the link in the description below. Wow, that was quite a challenge of that interview, where the initial, I guess, discovery of Pat King or his connection to the COVID myth theory began. So for those unaware who Pat King is, he is essentially leading a movement saying that although the virus is not a hoax, actually, I think he even is saying that the virus is a hoax. I'll let you watch that interview. You can make your own decision. It was quite a confusing thing, but he is the one who fundamentally started the movement, saying that this virus is being used as a weapon against the population to control our rights and remove our freedoms. And here we are. I think that was last April or last August. It was an A month. And here we are. We're now January 2022, now February 2022, where we have a convoy of truckers that have lost their rights to drive without isolating due to lack of vaccine. And this is what is happening in our capital right now. Multiple truckers and multiple individuals in support of these truckers have gone. In order for me to understand the debate about the intent of this protest, I had to really research who Pat King was and what his philosophies were. And I had to look at the observations of what we saw at this event. So was this protest peaceful? I watched it for quite a bit between 2 days. Most of what I watched was right on Capitol Hill, near the unidentified soldiers' grave memorial stone or memorial statue. A lot of it was directly in front of the entrance to Capitol Hill. And it seemed, when you look at it indirectly, it seemed like it was peaceful, fun. People were dancing, people were chanting, people were unified. There were some speeches. But then I had to look into it a little bit more from, the point of view of all those who are afraid of this movement. So a year ago, in January, we had the insurrection in the United States, where a bunch of supporters of Donald Trump felt that the elections were rigged and that he was the rightful president, and tried to take over the Capitol in the US. And so there were many comparisons of this to the insurrection. There were many concerns that would become an insurrection. And I was wondering why there would be these concerns. And then I started to research Pat King, and it kind of goes around in circle. And he's quite militant. There are video clips of him saying that this will not get resolved without bullets. There's even some hatred and threats towards the police. These are all videos that I've watched with my own eyes and listened with my own ears. Quite aggressive fellow. But even further than that is, with his history, he has connections with neo-Nazi groups, and he is known as a neo-Nazi. Now that's concerning. It's concerning as a person of color, and we are in a podcast of people of color, or for people of color. So it's important to touch on this, because I think we can all be quite uncomfortable with the idea of leaving the dictatorships in our countries that we left to come immigrate to Canada, and then be just in the same situation, and even worse, have the country run by neo-Nazis. And so when we say that it's an insurrection, we're essentially saying that they're trying to do a coup d'etat, or take over the state. I don't believe that that is what they are necessarily doing, but I do believe they have political motives with Pat King, or Pat King has his own political motives, I should say. What I also saw was a lot of, very subtle symbols that indicated to me that this was a neo-Nazi event. Tremendous abuse of the Star of David, tremendous abuse of the Nazi symbol, the swastika. And, we can all say that main excuse that I heard everywhere, which is, no, we're just using it to say that the government are Nazis. Well, if you were anti-Nazis, you would have the symbol of an X going across the Nazi swastika, but that was not what we saw. We saw actual flags containing the swastika symbol. We saw actual Gadsden flags. We saw Trump flags. I actually saw those with my own eyes in the live videos. I saw a really disturbing sign on the front of a truck that said, it either said stop the trannies or stop trannies, which is beyond me in 2022, that we are still having these kind of hate speech publicly. And what else did I observe? Oh my goodness, there was just so much. It was literally 2 days where I was trying to read the signs. One person said, proud to be a fringe, misogynistic, sexist, racist. Now, whether that's sarcastic or not, it's inappropriate to put that on a poster. And I have to say that I only saw 2 people of color the entire time. One was one of the truckers. He was a Black man with dreadlocks, very visibly dark. And the other one was one other Black individual, male, who was in the crowd. Other than that, there were allegedly some Indigenous individuals. I would love for you to comment on this or message us if you were actually Indigenous, or if you know the people who were there and know that they were not, because there's allegations that the individuals that were going around with the drums were actually highly offensive, not Indigenous, very much appropriating the culture and offending the Indigenous people. These are more theories. These are not my observations. Looking at them, I could not tell whether they were Caucasian or whether they were Indigenous descent. So this to me seemed like a primarily Caucasian event, which again feeds into the neo-Nazi movement philosophy. When I looked at this event and I started to really analyze whether or not this is an insurrection, another event came to mind, and it was the 2011 Tahrir Square revolution in Egypt. As many of our listeners know, I am of Egyptian descent. It was the proudest and most horrific moment of my life that brought cultural, pride and complete cultural despair when it came to that quote unquote revolution that happened in Egypt. And this event really mirrors a lot of what happened in the events of Tahrir Square in 2011. I believe that the protesters in Ottawa really were there for the right reason for them, which is that they were there to fight for their right to be able to have employment. And I think that's the primary thing, considering that there were so many PPC signs with Max's face on them saying the right to work, le droit de travail, au travail. Max is a whole other, in my opinion, neo-Nazi, Max Bernier. And that's a whole other discussion for another day, or one of the many other episodes where I bring him up. If you want to protest for your cause, and you know that the leader is one that is corrupt, why would you knowingly choose to piggyback off of that movement? Saying that your intentions were not of hate. If it sounds like a cat and it looks like a cat and it feels like a cat and it smells like a cat, it's usually a cat. And so, the guy is spewing neo-Nazi hatred, left, right, and center, talking about Pat King. He's clearly not there for most Canadians because he believes in Wexit, which is complete separation of the West from the East, or the Central Canadian population, self-governance. And yet we had truckers coming from Eastern Central Atlantic Canada going to Ottawa to support this cause that's led by a man who really doesn't care about them. Going back to Tahrir Square, in 2011, what happened was, after I want to say 40 years of dictatorship, the population was fed up. They wanted change in Egypt. You had a new generation of young, fresh brains that wanted a different life. You had the disappearing middle class. You had extreme increases in poverty. Women were fed up with the abuse that they were getting on the streets. Just overall, there was a lack of satisfaction, lack of jobs. And then there was also something called the secret police in Egypt, which was essentially something like a spy agency run by the government, but it was to spy on the public. And it was basically like the politeness police, but significantly worse, really forcing, certain morals onto the population, whether they liked it or not. And so between the hunger, the lack of rights, and now the lack of, dignity, people became fed up. So they went in front of the parliament and the government in Cairo, Egypt, on a square named Tahrir Square. It's kind of like a little circle, really. They call it Tahrir Square, but it's a circle. And it's a little field of grass in the middle of like a little highway facing, there was, the old American University in Cairo and Parliament Hill. And thousands and millions of people went to have their voices heard. There was also a huge Sudanese refugee situation in Egypt at the time as well. And the Sudanese could not get rights. So for days and weeks, the people were screaming for the resignation of President Mubarak. And he was a president in Egypt. How dictatorships work in the Middle East is, yes, they have elections, but the president always wins at 99 or 100%. So it's rigged. But he didn't resign. But what he said was, as a president, he said, I would not run for re-election. That was not enough for the people, and I don't blame them. and they were frustrated. And I remember having an interview within, I think it was like 3 hours of him making the statement that he will not be running for re-election with CBC. And I was asked my opinion, and I said, well, the logic in me dictates that this is actually very good, because him stating that he will not run for re-election means the elections will continue to proceed as is. I think there was still another 2 years or something left before the next re-election. And it would be enough time to fundraise, grow, and develop political parties that actually represent the public. But my biggest concern then was that people would be so hungry, so desperate for change, so frustrated that they would demand the change be now, and that he would resign immediately. Well, if he resigned immediately, that means there would be an election immediately. And the only people with money or influence to run at that time were either the people associated with the dictator or the Islamic Republic Party, the ones who would turn Egypt back into an Islamic state. And of course, the Islamic State won. That was the leader that was chosen, and they were democratically elected. And I said that should Egyptians not accept that Mubarak continue to work his term, I fear that another corrupt leader will come, and we will go into something far worse than what we had before. Of course, the Egyptian people were not satisfied, continued protesting, and eventually Mubarak resigned. The elections were done. The Islamic State was elected. Laws started changing dramatically, quite religiously in the country. People began to be quite afraid. And so, of course, the military decided to step in. And then you went from an Islamic state to a military state. Why am I saying all this? Because I'm hoping that somebody in this convoy, or some of these individuals who want to protest and want this change to come yesterday, I want you to see the bigger picture. I want you to see that this can go significantly worse. I want you to go out and really evaluate, first off, who you're putting your trust in. Individuals put their trust in the Islamic State, and then they put their trust in the military, and both of them essentially rape them of their rights. You are standing by saying we can't help that this movement is represented by a neo-Nazi. You're saying that you're fighting for change for everyone, yet I see very profane images of the misuse of the Star of David, of Islamophobic signs, of transphobic signs, of swastikas. Unbeknownst to you, you canceled the memorial of the worst massacre in the general public in the most recent history of Canada, which was the Quebec mosque shooting. You canceled the memorial for that by protesting on the same day. And so you actually affected your brothers and sisters who were mourning. And you're saying you are doing this for everybody. And at the same time, you're saying, well, how dare the government make decisions for you? Well, first and foremost, how dare you make the decision that we need you to fight for us and for our rights? Citizen to citizen, I'm saying this to you. But at the same time, I see you and I hear you, and I know you're frustrated. And you know what? I would be lying if I said I agree with all the mandates. I don't agree with a lot of the mandates. The basic science knowledge disagrees with it. Economists disagree with it. Dictators seem to really love them, but that's a whole other story. I agree with you. It's going too far. But this is when we as a society need to get together and collectively communicate with each other. You want to drop all the labels? That's fine, but you need to drop them too. You want support for your rights? That's fine, but you need to support our rights too. And as people of color, and as parents of children of color, saying the lame excuse of, well, we're trying. We've said it before in our podcast. That is the whitest excuse you can use, and it's as good as trash because you're not trying. It shouldn't take 48 hours for us to look at a guy with a Confederate flag and say, get out of here. We do not want you here. We are here to peacefully protest, and you are holding a sign that reeks of death and violence and hatred. That doesn't take 48 hours to do. You shouldn't be dancing around this guy. It's not cool. It's not acceptable. For those of you willing to walk side by side with someone holding a sign that's incredibly transphobic, you're saying my body, my choice, yet you're literally standing beside someone who is transphobic. Is that not the exact opposite of my body, my choice? And you're supporting Maxime Bernier, someone who absolutely does not believe in reproductive rights and does not believe in homosexual and transgendered rights. So how can you stand there and say that you are supporting these people for everyone? You aren't. And that's fine. It's not your responsibility. Just don't lie about it. And I'm not saying you're not allowed to be frustrated. You are allowed to be frustrated. And you are allowed to protest for your rights. But you're expected to do it in a well-informed, intelligent, respectful, considerate manner if you want the support of the general public. Because if you can't follow the basic foundation of human decency and respect, then you are never speaking for your neighbors and your friends. You're not speaking for anyone but yourself. And to say that Pat King is just, that was him before. Well, yesterday morning, Pat King recorded and aired a video where he referred to Black protesters and Indigenous protesters and protesters of color as rioters, as criminals, as violent people. That is not true. To stigmatize and violently depict people in that way, that's not true. I'm not sitting here saying people who fight for the rights of white people are bad. But white supremacists and neo-Nazis are bad. They are criminal. They are terrorists. And in fact, speaking of terrorists, the way that these neo-Nazis operated created this GoFundMe page. Did you know that for every penny you donate on GoFundMe, the receiver of your donation will receive the donor's information, their contact of how or who sent them the money? And therefore, they can go back and reach out to that person. Now, in the past, we have talked about, not we as in myself, but we as in the general media have talked about, the subtle ways that ISIS and the Taliban and all these other terrorism organizations recruit people who don't even realize that they're getting recruited. Well, here you have a terrorism organization collecting data, collecting financial support. And all you can do is make excuses when we point it out to you. How is this any different than an ISIS recruitment? It's just general food for thought. And if you are not one of the protesters out there, show those protesters some love. They're tired. They're desperate. They just want to be heard. They want someone to look at them and acknowledge the fact that they've lost and sacrificed so much and they're so sick of it. And they're so done with being asked to sacrifice and give more from people that we know for a fact are not giving much at all back. Nor are they even following the same rules. It's time for us to stop being angry at each other as citizens and start collectively standing up for each other as human beings. And if you can't fight for all human beings, don't say you are. You cannot say you fight for the rights of all human beings beside a numbnut wearing a Star of David in a disrespectful way, wearing a MAGA hat, wearing a swastika, wearing a Confederate. You can't. Those individuals do not deserve any more of your excuses. They have a whole list of their own. And you're definitely not choosing love. Meanwhile, we're still finding more bodies. 95 more graves were found last week. If anybody's still wondering if we're still looking for the graves of these dead children that died in schools. Isn't that the weirdest sentence you'll ever hear? The graves of children who died in schools. That's gross. But we're not paying attention to that. We're too busy paying attention to neo-Nazis and what they're doing. We're too busy paying attention to politicians who don't give a damn about us and worrying about what they're planning behind closed doors instead of just making sure that they don't end up behind those closed doors again. The fact is, everybody, we're either all going to sink together or swim together. There is no in between. So we need to start working together. We need to start paying attention to what is going on. We need to be smarter than our oppressors. And if there's one thing I learned from Tahrir Square, is the worst idea in the book is to overthrow one oppressor by supporting an even worse oppressor and giving them even more power. That's it for my monologue. That was a lot, but it's asking you to think. To the truckers, I hope you are safe. I hope you are warm. I hope you keep your jobs, and I hope they stop the stupidity of preventing you from doing your job because you're already pretty darn isolated. And to everybody listening, be kind to each other, support one another. But most of all, none of it matters if you can't stand up for each other. Have a great day.